The reading this morning is taken from Luke chapter 21, verses 5 through 9. And as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, As for these things which you see, the days will come when there shall be not left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign when this is about to take place? And he said, Take heed that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for this must first take place, but the end will not be at once. The word of the Lord. Please be seated. Some of you who know me well know that I have a fascination with rocks. Love rocks. I've always loved rocks. My grandfather was a rock collector and rock cutter and rock hound, and when I was 1 or 2 years old, he used to take me with him out into the fields looking for rocks, and I would sit in the dirt and pick up rocks and polish them and look at them like I saw him do. If you were to come to my garage today, there are several large boxes full of rocks that my wife would dearly love for one of you to come in and steal and get rid of. I don't know what to do with them, but I can't bear to get rid of my rocks. Maybe this fascination with rocks and with digging is the reason I've gone the last few years to Israel to dig. First thing that you see when you come to the site where I've been digging for the last 8 years is at Tel Tamar in southern Judah, is a huge fortress made of massive limestone ashlars. Whoever built that fort obviously intended for it to last. But everywhere at the site are signs of destruction. Some places there are ash layers up to a foot deep. Other places you see cracks in the walls that were put there by earthquake damage. By the time the Romans built a fort on top of the hill there at the spring, they probably were not aware that there had been a massive Judean fort earlier there below their feet. But not only at Tamar, but elsewhere in the Middle East and throughout the Middle East are the signs of things that were intended to be permanent, but are now just curiosities. Jumbled and buried fragments of monuments which were once beautiful and supposedly permanent. Almost everywhere you walk, as those of you know who have been to the Middle East, you crunch, crunch, crunch on potsherds and broken possessions of the dreams and aspirations of civilizations long gone. And nowhere is this more apparent than in recent excavations outside the Temple Mount at Jerusalem. The main commercial street, and many of you have probably been there, the main commercial street alongside the Temple Mound has been excavated in the recent decade or so. And what has been uncovered is a jumble of paving stones, portions of walls, remains of merchant stalls, and ritual baths. The ruins, I think, are both revealing and cautionary. They tell us at once how people lived in antiquity and how they worshiped, and they also tell us about the collapse of civilizations and the demise of corporate and individual dreams. In our reading from Luke today, Jesus responds to comments about the beautiful temple, its massive stones, the impressive system of offerings and sacrifices which disciples and others near to Jesus were admiring. Especially for country Galileans, the spectacle of the temple and the organization of it would have been impressive. But these impressive, beautiful stones were doomed to destruction. How could this be? These walls were the epicenter of Jewish faith and culture, the culmination of hundreds of years of struggle and sacrifice. Also, God had made unequivocal promises to David about his eternal choice of Jerusalem and the temple. Many thought that the temple was a guarantee of God's presence and blessing, even though there had been many warnings about such thinking throughout their history, about placing trust in the presence of the temple rather than in the God of the temple. Jesus tells them in words reminiscent of Jeremiah chapter 7 that not one stone would remain on top of another. Chapter 21 ends a section in Luke that deals with Jesus' temple dialogues with Pharisees and others and his teaching in the temple. In chapter 20, Jesus drives out the money changers from the temple. Also in chapter 20, the scribes and Pharisees are condemned for defrauding widows of their livings. In chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, the passage immediately preceding what was read, a poor widow puts all of her living in the coffer, 2 tiny lepta, into the treasury, a striking example both of her genuine sacrifice and probably the abuse of the poor. In Luke, the temple is the house of God, supposedly devoted to prayer, a center for the practice of injustice and fraud, and a temporary building doomed to destruction. Perhaps this is the most disquieting thing about Luke chapters 20 and 21. The tendency in the practice of religion to confuse finances with fidelity and programs for prayer. In the accomplishment of religious obligations, often the Jewish leaders were guilty of injustice and fraud as well as the commercialization of the faith. Jesus warned his disciples that all the trappings of religion were doomed for the fire, both in the immediate crisis of the destruction of the temple, which was imminent, and in the coming end of the age. But beautiful stones and ornate offerings, and ornate organization of worship and religious activity have always been hallmarks of settled Christendom. But beautiful stones and ornate offerings do not last. Where Christianity has thrived in the world, in due time have come beautiful architecture and complex organization. But all one has to do is travel a bit in modern Europe to see a Europe full of ruins of cathedrals, decayed monuments to a once vibrant faith community. When I was in the Netherlands, I saw many such museums of a once vital faith in the country which is now the most secular in Europe. I suggest also that today we here are not immune from the decay of our beautiful stones and ornate worship. I once visited a church which had thrived 30 years ago. They had built an imposing building and had many church programs. Nowadays, the church is 1/5 the size it used to be. The members fill a very small section of the central area of that auditorium. Another church I know, and we could multiply examples of this, sold its building and moved to the suburbs when the downtown area it was in began to decay and the demographics changed. The city leaders lamented that only 2 churches had remained in this large metropolitan area beset with urban problems and need for the gospel. The destruction of the temple was inevitable and a stage along the way to the end of the age. While Luke 21:5 through 24 deals mainly with the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the temple from the standpoint of Jesus' ministry, verses 25 through 33 deal with the end of all things and the coming of the Son of Man in glory. The destruction of the physical symbol of God's presence with His people Israel points to the coming end of all things. But we're still living in the end times, and our beautiful stones are also doomed for the fire, either in an intermediate crisis or in the culmination of all things. In 2,000 years, when those who love the dirt and rocks like I do excavate our church buildings, what will they find? Will they find tumbled rocks and ornate oddities? Or will our legacy be in the faith and works of compassion of those who come after us? In the conduct of our ministries, it is still possible to mistake beautiful stones and ornate offerings for compassion and faithfulness. Our beautiful stones and ornate offerings will not last. Doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with God are the stones which last.